beneath the gentleman you will become.
My intention is not to fall in love.
Love is not always the result of intention.
I am ready to follow the boy to the wild beasts of this city.
Great Expectations continues tonight at 9 on BBC One and iPlayer.
Now, good to have you with us. The time is 9 o'clock and you're watching BBC One.
Good morning. We've got a great hour ahead, but first a warning. Politicians are on the prowl. Careful if there's a knock at the door.
How are you doing? Sorry to disturb you. I'm here.
They're after your backing. Keir Starmer wants to grab control in Middle England, Swindon.
Do you believe that Britain deserves better?
The Lib Dems subtly using a tractor to go after the countryside vote.
The British people can send the Conservatives a very strong message that they're fed up of them.
The Prime Minister on his home patch, yes, pointing out the potholes. Next month, the local elections are the first real fight for these two at the ballot box. An early verdict on the promises Rishi Sunak's made.
We will have a system whereby if people come here illegally, they won't be able to stay, they'll be detained and they'll be swiftly removed.
The loudest has been how to get a handle on immigration. His and the Home Secretary's plans stirring argument too.
Refugees deserve sanctuary in Britain.
So we have one big question this morning. How should politicians manage those who want to make Britain their home? This morning, for the first time, we're joined live by the Home Secretary, Suella Braverman, the woman who's trying to sort out the mess of the migration system. But what would Labour's answers be? Lisa Nandy joins us live from Salford too. But that's not all. Is it a daring new world or a grave danger? Or maybe both? We'll talk to a billionaire investor, Jan Tallinn, who thinks artificial intelligence must be controlled. And her stories, her characters are heading to the silver screen. Judy Blume, the author, agony aunt for a whole generation of young women whose books are being banned again in America, on what's going on across the pond.
Bad stuff, and that's what I think of it. You know, bad politicians.
And with me at the desk for the next 60 minutes, countryside queen Minette Batters, the president of the National Farmers Union, the UK boss of mega website eBay, Murray Lamble, and the Labour mayor of West Yorkshire and former Corrie queen, Tracy Brabin. Morning and welcome, and you do want to stay tuned to hear from the legend that it is Judy Blume a bit later on. But first of all, let's have a dive into the front pages. There they are on the first set. The Sunday Telegraph says there could be a new law where staff can sue their boss if customers offend them. The Observer says there's a crisis in care homes for children, and the Sunday Times warns of more health strikes to come. On the tabloids, the Mail on Sunday says there's a vegan plot to sabotage the Grand National. The Sunday Mirror paying tribute to Paul O'Grady, the comic who passed away this week. And the Sunday Express putting even more pressure on the Prime Minister over his migration commitments. Let's get straight to that. Welcome to you all, and we'll be talking to the Home Secretary in just a few minutes. But Minette, for the farming industry, often you say you've got to have immigration because you need people to pick things in the fields. But the government, says actually, no, you can get Brits to do it. What's going on?
It's just not as easy as that. We need about 70,000 people for seasonal work alone, and that is to pick, pack our fruit, vegetables and flowers. This is a bridge to an automated industry, but that is 5-10 years away and will take huge amounts of investment. So we've made the case all along for a seasonal worker scheme. I'm really pleased that the Home Office has listened. We now have a scheme for 45,000. That's still a big shortfall. And what this industry desperately needs is knowing what the road ahead is about. So making sure that we have a 5-year scheme so that not every single year, which it has been to date, we are having to battle effectively to get these numbers down.
What about in a business like yours, Murray? I mean, you're very much a new, modern business. What is going on with the labour force and what's your view on immigration?
So I spend a ton of time up and down the country talking to small businesses that we represent. There is fundamentally a shortage of skilled labour doing technically advanced work, and we need more of those people, both domestically trained and to come into the country. And so attracting highly qualified migrants is what we need in this country to help boost the economy.
What the government would say to you, though, is actually the onus should be on business and everyone to train up Brits. We've got, you know, people here who could do those jobs.
Yeah, look, there's no question there's a domestic role to be done, and the government has had policies which have been suspended or stopped which were there to help develop domestic skills, so that's part of the equation. There's still a shortage. If I look at what we need across the country, I speak to hundreds of thousands of businesses that we represent, and they have a problem with enough skills that we need to bring into the country.
I love the idea of people packing up their stuff for eBay to then sell on the big website. But Tracy, you know, you represent a big part of the country in West Yorkshire, and a part of the country where lots of people voted for Brexit, lots of them with the hope that immigration was going to come down. So what do you make of the conversation around it now?
Well, certainly we've got the same problem that Murray was talking about, businesses speaking to me about the challenge after Brexit, and however we voted, that's now done and dusted. We have to look at our new relationship with markets, and that's why, as the mayor, I want further control over skills, because businesses are telling me what they need, and we can react quite swiftly on the ground to deliver that skilled workforce, but we need the powers and the money, the deeper devolution to do that.
OK, well, Andy Street, the Birmingham mayor, made a similar case for giving more power to him when he was in the studio last week. But it's great to have you all here. Plenty more for you to do later in the programme. Now, Suella Braverman quit as Home Secretary for inadvertently leaking information about the job first time round. But Rishi Sunak brought her back immediately to one of the biggest posts in the land when he became Prime Minister. Now, most of her colleagues would characterise her as being on the right of their party, but she's not shy about controversy, a proud Brexiteer who says she's honest about the problems of the country and wants to get rid of this woke rubbish. Now, we'll talk to you a bit later about what you really mean by that. But first of all, let's talk about a pressing issue for lots of people who are just trying to have an Easter holiday. We know there are all sorts of queues and delays at Dover. When is that going to be cleared?
Well, let me just first of all say I really sympathise with families and school children who are trying to get to France for their Easter holidays. No one wants to be waiting for hours or overnight at Dover in a coach. There's been some really good working by the ferry companies. Effectively, what's happened is they've seen an acute pressure of bookings, of coaches and journeys across the channel. It is a very busy time of year. There's been some bad weather, but they've been putting on extra journeys overnight. They are positive that this will be eased very soon. I just urge people to have a bit of patience.
And what do you mean by very soon? Because we've seen this before. You know, it does seem that every school holiday there is this big pressure, and it happens that people get the beginning of their holidays ruined. So can you tell people when it's going to be sorted?
Well, this is ultimately an issue for the ferry companies. The government is in close contact with the Kent Resilience Forum, with the companies, with the authorities to ensure that they've got the right support necessary. But ultimately, this will ease. It will, I ask everybody to check their journey times carefully, but it is a busy time of year. I would say, generally speaking, our borders are flowing very, very well, and we do have very quick processes. It will just require a bit of patience.
Do you think it is going to happen, though, every school holiday? I mean, is this just something we should expect now?
No, not at all. I think if you look into recent years, I mean, things have been very smoothly, operating very smoothly at the border. We had strikes, we had industrial action over the Christmas period, and for example, Border Force, that's within my remit, we had a lot of contingency arrangements in place, and actually people were reporting faster than usual processing at the border when it came to the airports, for example. So I don't think that this is the state of affairs to go
so
forward.
It's not going to be a regular feature, along with packing the first aid kit, packing your chargers, packing your adapters. This is something you hope will ease and then we won't see again.
I think we've got a particular combination of factors which have occurred at this moment in time, and I think, as I say, we're supporting the port authorities, the ferry companies and the local bodies to ensure that people are properly supported.
OK, let's talk about something else that concerns the Channel. One of your flagship policies and the Prime Minister's slogan, to stop the boats. Now, you've said it's possible that 80,000 people will come across the Channel in small boats this year, but you've promised it will end. But can you just honestly say this morning it's not going to end this year in 2023?
Well, the Prime Minister's made the key pledge to stop the boats. It's going to be pretty obvious when we've succeeded in achieving that. I'm not going to put clear dates on everything. We've got to take the steps as they evolve. We've introduced a legislation very recently in the last few weeks that will make clear that if you arrive here illegally, you'll be detained and swiftly removed. We've reached a record deal with the French, and we are also moving forward and making progress on our asylum backlog. We've just announced new sites this week. So we have to abide by various timelines in Parliament or in court, but as quickly as possible is my ambition.
But it's not going to be this year, realistically, because of what you've set out. This is a long process.
As I said, I'm not going to put a firm date on it. We need to do what's next. We're in court. Our partnership with Rwanda is currently in litigation. We won in the High Court emphatically at the end of last year. We're now being appealed. There's a hearing later this month. We need to wait for the court to adjudicate. I can't control court deadlines, and therefore we will respect any decision from the court, but we have to abide by the timeline set by the judges.
And we'll talk a bit about that more in a few minutes' time. But your plan is to detain migrants who come to this country without permission. How many people are you expecting to detain, and where are you going to put them? So you have announced a couple of new sites this week, but right now there's only space for a couple of thousand people. So where are they going to go?
Well, let's be clear that our scheme to detain and swiftly remove does not require 50,000 new detention places. The government is in no way planning to do that. What we need to do
but
is
what happens if 50,000 people arrive?
We do need to increase our detention estate. We've got several thousand places already that we use, and we've got capacity there. We will need to increase some of our detention capacity. But what we believe to work is that once we are able to relocate people from the UK to Rwanda, pursuant to our world-leading deal, that will have a significant deterrent effect, and people will stop making the journey in the first place. They'll stop paying the evil people smuggling gangs in the first place, and numbers will come down. And that's not just a speculation. That's actually born out of experience of other countries who rolled out a similar scheme, for example, Australia.
And that is what you hope will happen, but there are still concerns that you will need many more places. Now, there are reports this morning that a deal has been done to have a barge with the Portland Port Authority, so there'd be a floating barge with migrants. Is it true that that deal has been struck to site a barge in that part of the country?
Forgive me, I'm not going to get into the details of private commercial negotiations. We announced
it's in the newspapers this morning. You can tell us if it's true or not.
We're talking to a lot of operators, a lot of owners of lots of different kinds of property around the country. We've announced sites earlier this week. Those are sites where we have a level of confidence. We're able to be public about those sites. We're aiming to roll out those sites very quickly and start making them fit for accommodation purposes and relocate people onto those sites for asylum purposes. But we're looking at all options. We're looking at all sorts of land and sites and vessels, and we're in negotiations with a high number of operators around the country.
But would you expect there to be migrants housed in that part of the country? Because the local MP there does think this is going to happen, and he also says it shouldn't happen.
I'm not going to confirm and I'm not going to preempt our private commercial discussions. You'll have to wait a little bit longer.
OK, there's a tension here, though, isn't there, Home Secretary? Because you and the Prime Minister talk very regularly about bringing down migration, in particular bringing an end to the terrible trade of people crossing the Channel and being exploited by people smugglers. Except that the government has also just presided over 500,000 people coming here last year. 250,000 people expected to come next year. So although we're hearing the government taking what you, I think, would say is a tougher line on immigration, tougher all the time, actually more people than ever before are coming to the UK.
I don't think it's fair to conflate illegal migration with legal migration. These are two very different cohorts of people. We've taken back control over our migration rules. After Brexit, we set up a points-based system, and therefore we have made, as a government, the decision to issue visas for work or study purposes, depending on legitimate rules that we have set up. That is very different to people coming here illegally, putting their lives at risk, paying evil people smuggling gangs, breaking our rules, and coming here to game our system. Those cannot be considered in the same, together in the same way.
Except many of our viewers this morning might think, well, hang on a minute, we did vote, many of them, to take back control of immigration. And for many people, that meant immigration coming down. And indeed, for you said in October you wanted immigration to come down to the tens of thousands. Now, is that still what you would like?
Our manifesto commitment is very clear that we want to get overall numbers down. And
but do you still believe
it
should be in the tens of thousands? Because that's what you said just a few months ago.
It is legitimate to question whether the levels of lawful migration are sustainable. We've issued a record number of work and study visas in the last year. We've had the highest level of net migration. We've got 7 million people already in the UK who are out of work. You've just heard from speakers there talking about labour market shortages. We have to get the balance right. We need to incentivise people already here to get back into the labour market, and we need to get the balance right between the number of people coming in for labour purposes.
But I think our viewers this morning will want to know, Home Secretary, if you, as the person in charge of the system, believe that legal migration should be in the tens of thousands rather than the 500,000 it was this year. It's a clear question. Do you still think that immigration should be in the tens of thousands?
The clear answer I can give you is that I support our manifesto commitment to get overall migration numbers down, including legal migration.
But you said in October. Have you changed your mind?
I do believe that we have, the high levels of the high numbers of people coming in through work and study routes is high. It places pressure on housing and accommodation supply. It places pressure on school places, on health services. Those are reasonable concerns, and we need to make sure that we're getting the balance right of encouraging our domestic workforce back into the labour market, and also ensuring that we do allow those highly skilled workers, those people who will come and help various sectors in our economy to thrive.
Let's talk then about your plan for migrants to go to Rwanda. I know you're proud of the deal that you've done with the Rwandan government, and you're happy about the arrangements that you've made with that government. But if migrants do end up there from the UK, if you get your way in the courts, if they're not happy, should they be able to protest about their living conditions once they get there?
Well, our scheme makes it clear that if you come here illegally, you're going to be detained and thereafter swiftly removed to a safe country or to a country from which you came if it's safe. Rwanda is our first choice of country to which we want to relocate you. Rwanda is a safe country. That's been upheld authoritatively by the High Court. We're in an appeal process, but there's an emphatic judgment and analysis by senior judges who have looked at Rwanda, looked at our arrangements with Rwanda, and concluded that they are in compliance with international law, compliant with human rights laws, refugee convention laws, and actually that Rwanda is a safe country.
And
I've just been to Rwanda.
And I know you've just been to Rwanda, but I asked you a specific question. If people go there and those conditions are not upheld, should refugees in Rwanda be able to protest at the conditions that they're in?
We've dramatically reduced the avenues for legal challenge, because what we've found is that people use... I need to get to it. And what we found is people use legal avenues in a vexatious and frivolous way to thwart our ability to remove them or detain them. We need to dramatically reduce the legal avenues of challenge.
But I'm asking you about people, if they are sent from this country to Rwanda, what would happen to them once they are there? Is it safe to send refugees to Rwanda from Britain? You sound like you are completely convinced of that.
I am convinced that it is safe to send refugees to Rwanda.
Now, the reason I ask that is that in 2018, a group of refugees in Rwanda did stage a protest because their food rations were reduced. Do you know what happened to them?
I'm not familiar with that particular case.
Okay, well, I can explain to you and explain to our viewers what happened then. According to the United Nations refugee body, a group of refugees staged a protest. The Rwandan police then fired live rounds at them, and 12 people were killed. Now, the Rwandan government says it was a last resort, there was violence at the protests, but the United Nations and eyewitnesses say that live rounds were fired. We can show some pictures of what happened in the aftermath of that protest, and we've verified the location and the date at which that happened. Are you sure still that it is safe to send refugees to Britain and to Rwanda? And I suppose the point here is, if something went terribly wrong, would you end the arrangement with that country? Would you say, okay, you know what, that was a mistake, bring people back?
Well, as I said, that might be 2018. We're looking at 2023 and beyond. The High Court, senior expert judges have looked into the detail of our arrangement with Rwanda and found it to be a safe country and found our arrangements to be lawful. Rwanda, from which I've just returned, takes 100,000 refugees and resettles, and I met some of them in Rwanda on my recent visit from countries in the region. They have nothing but gratitude and thanks for Rwanda for the resettlement scheme that Rwanda has put on for, as I say, over 100,000 people who are fleeing persecution, fleeing conflict. They have a track record of successfully resettling and integrating people who are refugees or asylum seekers. I think we're on strong ground to say that Rwanda is a safe country. It is the right solution for us grappling with our small boats problem, and I believe it will strike the right balance of providing a humanitarian package of support for people who are refugees, but whilst at the same time being a deterrent to those seeking a life in the UK.
The United Nations, though, has said very clearly that it is not a safe place for refugees.
Yeah, and the High Court disagreed with the United Nations.
And that's being challenged?
The United Nations
that's being
appealed.
Appealed.
Yep, and we're going through the process. I side with the court. Ultimately, they heard out, they listened to the United Nations in evidence in this hearing. They disagreed with the United Nations assessment. The United Nations continues to work with Rwanda to resettle thousands of people every year in Rwanda, regardless of those concerns. So, in my view, and in the view of the court, and in the view of 100,000 people who are already in Rwanda, Rwanda is a safe country. It is appropriate for our purposes to work in partnership.
And you're determined to go ahead with it, and it's a complicated problem to solve. But I ask you again the question, if something terrible like that happened, where 12 refugees were shot at and lost their lives, if something awful happened when refugees were sent from the UK to Rwanda, would you end the policy?
What I will also say is our legislation makes provision for those extreme circumstances whereby if there is something unforeseeable, serious and irreversible harm, someone would be able to challenge the decision. We consider that to be a very outside chance, a very extreme situation, but there's always allowance in the legislation to allow for that.
In the deal as well, which we've had a good look at it, there is also a suggestion that the UK will resettle some of Rwanda's most vulnerable refugees. How many people do you expect will come to the UK from Rwanda under this scheme?
No, we don't foresee that happening.
Well, hang on, it's in the agreement. It says the participants will make arrangements for the United Kingdom to resettle a portion of Rwanda's most vulnerable refugees in the United Kingdom.
Our arrangement is very much focused on people who are coming to the UK from safe countries and unlawfully, and then being resettled to Rwanda.
But it's in the agreement then. So why did you sign it if it's in the agreement? That's what it says in black and white.
Our scheme is uncapped. It means that we can potentially send over several thousands of people from the UK to Rwanda. When I went to Rwanda, I saw with my own eyes how Rwanda is getting ready to receive these people.
And you have said that, but is there a limit on the number of people that Rwanda could send back to this country? Because you've signed an agreement that says in black and white the United Kingdom will resettle a portion of Rwanda's most vulnerable refugees.
The balance and the reality of this agreement is that Rwanda is taking people from the United Kingdom. We are resettling people who have arrived here illegally and therefore will be removed or relocated to Rwanda. As I've said, I've just seen the accommodation that's in train. They're building the housing that will be used to accommodate people who are coming from Rwanda. I visited a school that will be used to support the education
And you've said that,
needs.
but it is clearly here in black and white that the agreement you have signed also says that the United Kingdom might have to take refugees from Rwanda. But I think our viewers will hear that you don't want to address that point.
Well, so the arrangement is very clear. On a balance and overwhelmingly, Rwanda will be taking people from the United Kingdom, not the other way around.
OK, well, let's talk about an important announcement that you are making today and we'll be talking about this week, about terrible abuse, sexual abuse of children and grooming gangs. Now, you are announcing that after many years of this being made as a suggestion, it will be mandatory for people to report child abuse, whether it's a teacher, a social worker. This is something that has to be reported. But how will that work? Will it be just if there's a suspicion or evidence? And why will that make a difference?
Well, what we've seen is a large-scale problem. I would call it one of the largest scandals in recent British history, whereby in towns around England and around the country, vulnerable white girls who have been living in troubled circumstances, in challenging situations, have been abused, exploited, drugged, raped by networks of gangs of rapists. And we have to be honest about the fact that some of these gangs have been overwhelmingly British Pakistani males. The authorities, whether that's social workers or teachers or police officers, when they've become aware of these problems, have turned a blind eye, and they have roundly failed to take the requisite action to safeguard these vulnerable girls. Many of these victims have not secured justice. We therefore need to change the system. There's been a lot of inquiry, a lot of reporting on the problem. The government's now in a position to take action, and that's why we'll be introducing a mandatory duty on childcare professionals to actually report when they become aware of concerns relating to child sexual exploitation.
You say this is a large-scale problem, and you've said this morning it's an open secret. I mean, are you saying that in the British Pakistani community, people are complicit in this abuse?
Well, the reports do demonstrate. If you read the report on Rochdale and Rotherham, the Casey report, they do say that concerns about political correctness, worries about being called bigoted. South Yorkshire Police has been come in for criticism in previous years for not taking seriously the very serious, devastating claims by young white girls who've complained about being raped and abused by networks and rapists who have come from the British Pakistani male community. There's been a communal shutting down
so you
in
put
these
the responsibility
areas.
on the community for not speaking out?
The fault lies with, obviously, the perpetrators for carrying out these heinous and vile acts of depravity, but also the authorities. There's been a social ignorance. There's been a willful turning of the blind eye. There's been a failure to act. There's been a failure to act. Silence has enabled this abuse, and we need to therefore ensure that there's a duty, there's an obligation on those professionals that they can't get away with inaction.
But you're making quite strong accusations that people are somehow turning a blind eye and complicit in abuse. Who do you mean? Because some of our viewers might think this morning, listening to you say, well, the authorities have failed. Well, the Conservatives have been in government for a very long time. And if you look at the system that's meant to support these victims, often prosecutions never happen. We know from the NSPCC that child sexual abuse victims sometimes have to wait more than a year before their case gets to court. So who are you blaming?
Well, if we want to get political about it, didn't want to get political about it, but some of these councillors, senior politicians in Labour-run areas over a period of years absolutely failed to take action because of cultural sensitivities, not wanting to come across as racist, not wanting to call out people along ethnic lines. Justice hasn't been done for many of these victims. We now need to introduce a package of measures. That's what we're setting out today and tomorrow. A duty to report so that actually professionals are obliged to take action, and actually an energetic approach to tracking down these perpetrators, many of whom are still running free, and ensuring that they don't continue with these vile abuses.
I just want to close and listen to you talk about that. I think that you're somebody who believes that you want to tell what you see as the truth very strongly, boldly. You're not afraid of people accusing you of being provocative or trying to stir things up. I just wonder, for people listening to you this morning, and you're relatively new in a big job, what kind of Home Secretary do you think you are? And maybe what kind of Home Secretary do you want to be? What do you want to be known for?
Well, I want to be a Home Secretary who gets things done, a doer, and someone of action and results overwhelmingly. I want to be a Home Secretary. I hope I am a Home Secretary who speaks really for the patriotic, law-abiding, often silent majority. A Home Secretary who reflects the views of her constituents in Fareham, who are decent, fair-minded, law-abiding people. A Home Secretary that's going to tell the truth about problems that we are grappling with in our society without fear of offending celebrities or media outlets.
But what about offending parts of the public? I mean, do you care if you offend people?
this isn't about offending. This is about being honest and being straightforward. Whether it's ensuring that we get common sense policing and backing the police to take a robust line against unacceptable behaviour, or protecting freedom of speech when it comes to non-crime hate incidents, getting them to visit every domestic burglary, whether it's taking a fair approach to migration, introducing a package of legislation and a deal to provide humanitarian support, but also a robust deterrence, whether it's ensuring that we overhaul our prevent scheme relating to counter-terrorism. I'm not going to shy away from the difficult conversations because we need to tell the truth. That's what the British people expect of us.
Okay, Suella Braverman, thank you very much for coming and having a conversation with us here in the studio this morning. Thank you for coming in. Now, in a second, we'll hear what our panel said to all of that. But of course, as ever, we want to hear what you made of the Home Secretary's comments as well. Email us in the usual way at kuenssberg.co.uk or the hashtag on social media, BBC Laura Kay, if you are that way inclined. Tracy, what did you make of this Home Secretary?
Well, I would say, Suella, where have you been? Because certainly some of the suggestions she was making are already in train. I think calling it the largest scandal in British history, we've had a Conservative government for 13 years.
But she blamed Labour councillors in her interview. She said that in some parts of the country that Labour councillors had felt, you know what, we can't call this out because we don't want to offend people.
But this is not helpful. The blame game is not helpful. What we want is solutions. And we've seen with this new announcement, it does feel like policy by press release at the moment. This new announcement that already hard-working professionals should call out, of course, when they hear about child abuse, but that is currently happening. Anybody that works with children or in the NHS has that statutory obligation. And actually, I would suggest we need more hard-working professionals rather than putting further legal expectations on them. And this is a Home Secretary that has also made it more difficult for victims of sex trafficking to be protected from those grooming gangs that she was talking about. So it does feel like it's very headline, it feels very dog whistle, if I may say, and it doesn't actually deal with what's happening on the ground. And, for example, talking about, if I just may quickly say that police will be called out to every burglary. Well, in West Yorkshire, we already do that. So it does feel like she's out of touch with communities.
OK, well, I'm sure there'll be a robust conversation about some of the policies the government's announcing on this in the next couple of days. Minette, we talked a lot about immigration and the government's overall approach. Now, you were clear with us before, you need people to pick fruit in the fields, but from what you heard about Suella Braverman, do you think that she's sympathetic to your concerns?
I think what business is missing effectively is two policies. You know, we simply do not have enough people who are unemployed in this country to do the jobs that are available. So it is holding our whole economy back. And for us in food and farming, the whole supply chain, it is massively challenging. There simply are not enough people here. And if I take Herefordshire with seasonal work as an example, you've got 500 people who are currently unemployed. You've got a requirement for 2,500 seasonal workers.
But she, interestingly, didn't repeat her previous comments that she wants immigration to be in the tens of thousands. So maybe actually she is showing a bit more flexibility to you than previously. I don't know.
The biggest challenge is that Home Office haven't engaged with business. They are the hardest department to get into, to engage with.
Murray, you're nodding along there. Do you agree with that?
I couldn't agree more strongly with what Minette said in terms of just the shortage of skills that we have in the UK. I was glad to hear the Home Secretary talk about illegal and legal immigration and make a very clear delineation between the two. At a personal level, I really hope that as a country we can treat people that come into this country illegally with care and dignity to make sure that wherever they get resettled they can do so successfully and happily. So at a personal level, that's what matters to me. On the topic of legal migration, what I heard the Home Secretary say is we still want to bring those numbers down, and I still see when I go out and talk to businesses across the country, they do not have the technical skills that they require to enable their businesses to run in a modern economy. And so this is skilled labour where we need more people in the country. Okay,
well, talking of the modern economy, there's some very big changes coming when it comes to technology, and some of them have got some pretty big warnings attached. If you think of artificial intelligence, we heard from Elon Musk and over 1,000 senior tech executives this week in an open letter saying there has to be a 6-month pause in the development of the most powerful artificial intelligence systems before they completely outsmart us. Now, we know the latest AI chatbots you might have used, like ChatGPT, sound like humans. They can perform in many ways better than humans, getting your homework done in a few seconds. And AI is already everywhere. It's in your phone, it might be in your car if you have a fancy one, and it's saving lives, doing things like improving medicine. But artificial intelligence can also make something like this look a bit convincing. The white puffer jacket that the Pope didn't actually wear in real life. That went wild all over the internet, even though the picture was a fake. And as we've just been talking about, it could be a threat to employment too. 2 out of 3 jobs in the developed world, you might be worried, will be affected by this. That's according to the bankers Goldman Sachs. But could it be genuinely very dangerous? Should we be excited, terrified, or both? The billionaire Jan Tallinn was one of the founders of Skype, and he wants all of us to take the threat desperately seriously from artificial intelligence as it advances and advances.
With every generation, they are getting more and more competent. And the only way we can control them right now is by being more competent, understanding the world better than they are, than they do. So we can still so-called pull the plug. However, it's not guaranteed as they get like very competent. It's not guaranteed that we can continue to control them in a way that we would like.
It's quite a leap, though, for most people to imagine that something could change our real life environment. Could you give us practical examples of the dangers humans might face?
Sure. Again, I think it's kind of important to look at what humans have done on this planet as a result of our economy. And the biggest kind of acknowledged problem that humanity has caused, the global warming, that is a side effect of our economic activity on this planet. We are concerned about things like significant increase of temperature on this planet. Now imagine if you substitute human civilization with AI civilization, a civilization that could potentially run millions of times faster than humans. I mean, if I'm pressed for things that, okay, what is the concrete thing that can go wrong, then I'm starting to think about things like nanotechnology. For example, AI taking over labs that can produce, that can synthesize DNA, that can pull proteins into 3D structures, that can that can then manipulate the environment much faster than anything human scale can.
Some experts in your industry, though, think your letter was over the top and there's some scaremongering going on. What do you say to that?
Last year, there was a questionnaire among top published machine learning researchers in the field. And half of them, and I repeat, half of them, thought that AI can be existential risk. The probability of AI being an existential risk is 10% or higher. So I think it's important to notice that if you have, as the metaphor goes, imagine that you're boarding a plane and there's an announcement that half of the engineers who built the plane think that this plane is going to crash, or there is at least 10% chance that this plane will crash. Then the correct response is to not fly.
Do you think politicians understand the risks?
So I think they increasingly do, yes. The thing with current paradigm of AI is that there is this big so-called pre-training regime. I mean, GPT means generative pre-trained transformer. So the pre-training phase is really expensive, really big experiments. So they are kind of comparable to enrichment of uranium. There is direct analogy to nuclear proliferation controls, because you have this expensive phase in AI. In nuclear case, it's enrichment of uranium, and in AI's case, it's the pre-training phase.
There are huge benefits for humankind from this technology, though.
Oh, yeah. I mean, at the end of the day, I'm a technologist, so I'm definitely not calling for complete stop on AI research. And in fact, the letter was very explicit about that worry really is those big pre-training experiments that are run that are resulting in uncontrollable AI. I think the rest of the AI field is just fine.
Is it realistic that governments can regulate here? Isn't it down to the very powerful companies and very wealthy tech leaders like you to do it?
I mean, I know personally that like many of the people who are going to be in the leading front of AI revolution, so to speak, and they're also human, and they want to live, right? And so it's in their kind of almost egoistic interests to make sure that this thing goes well. But like, of course, they have like very different constraints than I do. I'm not like I don't have that job of leading any AI companies. Therefore, like I can speak more freely than they can. But behind the closed doors, they're very sympathetic to these concerns, and even not behind closed doors.
Do you regret your own involvement and investment in developing this type of technology?
My rationale for investing in AI companies is that this gives me a ticket to hang around in the kitchens of AI companies and talk about the risks of AI, and always made sure that I am not a majority investor. So realistically, if I hadn't invested, they would have gotten investment from elsewhere, from venture capitalists, etc., who don't share the concerns that I have.
Jan Tallinn, thanks very much.
Thank you so much.
Well, that's the first billionaire I think we've had on the programme. I mean, Murray, you run maybe not a business as big as the ones he's been involved in, but you run a big tech business with eBay. And you hear that and you think, this is really dangerous. But should we be concerned, or, you know, is some of this hype?
Look, I think the first thing is that AI, as you mentioned, has been around for many years, and we're all exposed to it in many ways. If I think in our business, we recently acquired an AI-based business to protect consumers and businesses from fraudulent activity, to stay ahead of fraudsters. That's wonderful.
So that's a goodie AI.
Yeah, we translate millions of product items for consumers all over the world so they can buy products from British companies, and that's amazing. That happens at a scale that couldn't happen before. What's clear now with generative AI is that it's a new scale of evolution. It's very hard to legislate on that. It's very hard to know what that might mean. But what's important is, how do you stay ahead of that, and how do you stay very close to what technology is coming? And Tracy, I won't ask you to be disobliging about your former colleagues in Westminster, but do you think the way actually that politicians set up regulation, do you think they've got a cat's chance in hell of staying ahead of this?
Well, we see at the moment, don't we, with the data bill, that no, actually the UK is behind others in understanding how important it is to be ahead of the game. Now, of course, it's an amazing thing, AI. And really,
the UK is really good at AI.
It's good for
as well,
health, it's good for all sorts of things. And actually in Bradford, we have the most postgrad AI data analytics students in the country. I'm very proud of that. The most diverse, youngest city in the UK. But I think we need to be ahead of it. We need to be on top of it, because if we're not, this is the country people will come to actually go further than we need. And I would say we have to listen to these 1,000 tech experts, because if we don't, then who knows where we're heading.
And Minette, I want to ask you about some other farming issues, but quickly on this. You read often that actually robots are going to be the answer for picking fruit and things. Is that realistic now?
It's happening. I mean, we've got robots that can pick strawberries, but, you know, the dexterity of the human hand is absolutely key. So effectively,
humans are still faster?
Oh, much faster. I mean, humans will be picking 10 strawberries for every robot's one, and it's the same with apples and everything else. And so the technology exists, but it is nowhere near fast enough. And of course, it relies on human teaching to get it up to speed, but it's a long way off and huge investment needed.
And briefly, I want to talk to you about another issue for the future, getting carbon emissions down, except what that might mean for farmers is being told what they can feed their cows. And without being too sort of classroom language about it, we're trying to control these bovine belches. What are farmers going to think about being told what to feed their flocks?
Well, look, we've felt it's a great opportunity, effectively, for agriculture to get to net zero. So we really believe with the right innovation, right technologies, right policies, we can get there and beat the government's target. So feed additives, probiotics, to make sure that cows are emitting less methane is a really good thing, actually, and it's already online, but also better genetics, better health status. You know, I think we can really be world leaders, effectively, in leading how we get to carbon neutral food production. This is one part of.
This is more serious than a cheap joke about cows. Yeah, and of course I said a flock, and of course that's terrible. It's a flock of sheep and a herd of cows. So to make that clear before the email inbox lights up with lots of complaints about my agricultural knowledge. Thank you, all three of you, for now. But I want to just quickly show you something else that was in the papers this morning, because you'll remember we've talked a lot about the Artemis mission to the moon. There's the giant rocket there. And the Sunday Telegraph this morning features 3 of the women who are vying to be on that next lunar trip back to the moon. And we hope after Easter that we might be able to speak to one of them from the Space Centre across the Atlantic. But let's get on with other business now. We heard at length from the Home Secretary, and let's talk to Lisa Nandy from the Labour Party. She's the Shadow Communities Secretary and she's with us from Salford. Good morning.
Good morning.
If the Home Secretary is right and the government's Rwanda policy works and reduces the number of people who are making the dangerous crossing across the Channel, would Labour keep it if you win the election?
Well, look, this is so far a policy that has cost the British taxpayer a huge amount of money and hasn't seen a single person go to Rwanda. So I think the evidence so far suggests that this is just yet another outlandish nonsense claim from a Home Secretary that is unable to do the very basics of getting her own system working. She complains about an asylum system that's broken. I think she really does need to ask who broke it, and the answer to that lies by looking in a mirror. I think this is a con-trick being perpetrated on the British people. The government is not processing asylum claims. They've got an enormous backlog. They've added £500 million to the costs because of these delays that have been caused by them pursuing all these new strategies, barges that don't exist, claims to send people to Rwanda that haven't materialised.
Except, listen, Andy, if the scheme does work, would Labour retain it? Because you've criticised what's happened so far, but the Home Secretary is determined to go ahead. And if, against your prediction, it does work, would Labour dismantle it?
No, look, I think this is I don't think we're ever going to be in the situation where we have to dismantle this, because I don't think it's real. Just like the barges that the Home Secretary promised this week that it turns out didn't exist. This is just yet another way of distracting from the fact that they're only processing 1% of the asylum claims of people who arrived last year. The reason that our hotels are full is because they haven't got a grip on the asylum system, they aren't processing claims, and they haven't got a returns agreement with France. That's what we would do. We'd set up a cell to tackle the criminal gangs working across borders. We'd process our asylum claims swiftly, and we'd get a grip on the asylum system. That, in the end, is the only way to run a fair, humane, effective system that commands the confidence of the British people. And frankly, she should be ashamed of herself for touring the TV studios, making more and more bold claims when she can't even do the basics of her own job.
Listen, Andy, she also has raised the issue of grooming gangs this morning. Now, the Home Secretary said it has been an open secret in some communities around the country that British Pakistani men have been abusing white girls. Do you agree with her?
You won't find anyone who is more concerned about child sexual exploitation than me. 20 years ago, I was working with children who had been through that horrendous experience of being groomed by gangs, raped, sexually assaulted, struggling to get access to justice, and was calling for mandatory reporting for child professionals who were involved in their case.
And
but
you have been raising this for a long time. You've done work on it for many, many years. But Suella Braverman actually accused Labour councils of turning a blind eye. Is she right?
In the cases of Rochdale and Rotherham, the reports were clear that there were politicians and officers who didn't report, sometimes for fear of political correctness. And I think 20 years ago, 10 years ago, when the Rochdale convictions happened, everybody across the political spectrum accepted that that was the case and that we needed to put measures in place to deal with it. But I have to say the Home Secretary is an absolute joke for her to turn up in the TV studios today talking about a willful blind eye, near complicit silence, talking about a lack of action. She's basically describing herself. The number of convictions for prosecutions has halved in the last 4 years, and prosecutions has halved in the last 4 years for child sexual exploitation. People are waiting nearly 2 years on average just to get to court. If anybody could be accused of turning a blind eye to what is a very real problem in this country across all backgrounds and ethnicities, it's the Home Secretary herself.
She would, of course, challenge that strongly and say that's why she's making that plan. Do you welcome the introduction, though, of this mandatory reporting requirement? Because, as you say, that's been called for a long time.
I would 100% welcome it, but what she's announced today is a consultation. How can it possibly be that 11 years after we had the convictions in the Rochdale case, all we've got is another consultation? There is a near widespread agreement that one of the problems with bringing people to justice and stopping child sexual exploitation is that if people working in and around children don't feel the confidence to report on what is happening. If that's the case, surely we need to make it absolutely crystal clear that that has to happen. There is no excuse for any more delays and inaction. The Home Secretary needs to come forward with more than just a press release. After 13 years, she needs to come forward with actual measures that are going to keep children safe in this country.
Now, Labour's big promise this week is that you would freeze council tax for people around the country. Now, the last time we spoke a few weeks ago, you said you wanted councils to have much more power. You want them to be in charge of much more of their own destiny. So why are you telling councils how much they can charge people?
We're not. What we're doing is proposing that the government use some of the money from the windfall tax in order to compensate councils for the lost revenue that's been taken from them from government, so that they don't have to put up taxes on working people at a time when people's food bills are going up, their energy bills are going up, their housing costs are going up, and now their taxes are going up as well.
But are you telling Labour councils that they should freeze council tax right now? Because you know it's very unlikely the government's going to change windfall tax. They've only had a budget a couple of weeks ago. They're not going to change that policy. So as things stand, are you saying to Labour councils, please freeze it? I mean, even in your own area, Wigan, they're putting the council tax up by 5%.
We've still got one of the lowest council tax rates in the north of
England. But they
England,
are putting it up, and you're saying we should have a freeze.
Yeah, but the reason that they're putting it up is because the government has given them two choices. They can either cut services or they can put taxes up on working people. That's why the Tory leader of Bournemouth recently resigned, because he said that this is just not acceptable. And across the country, Tory councils are charging more on average in council tax than in Labour areas. You pay about £345 more on average if you happen to live in a Tory authority than in a Labour authority. So this is not a question of Labour councils wanting to put up council tax. In fact, Labour councils have been moving heaven and earth to try and protect people from the unfair choices by this government. But we think that the government should make fairer choices right now. They should say to councils, we'll actually fund you this year so that you don't have to put up taxes on people, not force councils of every political persuasion to put those taxes up in order to defend basic services.
And let's talk about a different kind of tax. In the last couple of weeks, your boss and the Prime Minister have both revealed their tax returns, and we've all seen how much tax they paid, rather a lot for Rishi Sunak and rather a lot on capital gains, which of course is the tax people pay on investments or selling property or things like that, not on your normal wages. And you can see there on the screen how much it is, and Keir Starmer also paid a fair amount of capital gains, or not really on the same scale. Now, your colleague Angela Rayner said that those returns reveal a Tory tax system where the Prime Minister pays an unfair lower share of tax than the rest of us, except then your other colleague Rachel Reeves said that you wouldn't necessarily change the capital gains rate. So is it the case you're quite happy to bash it, but you don't want to change it?
No, I think what Angela was pointing out is that the tax system has got a very high burden on people across the board, particularly on working people, and we are very concerned about that. We've said we want to see taxes on working people come down. What I'm not going to do is get into making announcements about capital gains tax or other reforms to the system 18 months out from a general election when we just don't know what situation we're going to inherit. We believe in fairness. That will be the principle that guides us, and for the detail, I'm afraid, Laurie, you'll have to wait until closer to the election when we know what the economic situation allows.
OK, listen, Andy, it's always great to have you on the show. Thank you very much indeed for joining us from Salford. And do listen to this next item, because for those of us of a certain age, I know Lisa's a bit younger than me, but maybe not that much, the tattered copy is probably still somewhere on the shelf. The books of the American author Judy Blume provided wise counsel and revealing details about what was going to happen to you as you grew up, to millions of girls. The stories were dissected and earnestly discussed by gaggles of friends then and now, including my gang's 11-year-old selves. But if you missed out on the work of the writer who's sold 75 million books, her novel, Are You There, God? It's Me, Margaret, is finally, after many years and many requests, hitting our cinema screens. So long after it was first written, I asked Ms. Blume, why now?
It was the right moment because it was the right team. I just felt it in my gut.
I'm here to speak to you today about your changing body.
And it's true. It's so wonderful. I'm so glad I waited because it couldn't please me more. I love it.
Please, 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 please.
I think it was my son who said to me, just wait until all those people who grew up with your books are in power in Hollywood, and you're going to see what happens. And I'm so glad that I'm around to see it.
Now, you say you love the film, but what was it like for you to see it after all of these years?
I was with my husband and we watched it. And we were, both of us, you know, we cried, we laughed, we cried. And we, what can I say? We became fans. And then the first time I saw it in a theater with an audience was a thrill, because it's a very different feeling. The laughter, you know, the laughter, the tears, people coming up to you after. I mean, women who are very well-known writers came up to me and they just sobbed. They weren't sobbing because the movie was so sad. They were sobbing because it was their childhoods. You know, it took them back and they remembered.
Now, you've had so much success, but there's also been a lot of opposition to your books and the topics they discuss, like sex or young people being gay. And even now, some of them are being taken out of schools. What do you make of that?
Well, you know, I came through the 80s when book banning was really at its height, and it was terrible. And then libraries and schools began to get policies in place, and we saw a falling off of the desire to to censor books. Now it is back. It is back much worse. This is in America. It is back so much worse than it was in the 80s.
But Judy, you live in Florida, and the governor there, Ron DeSantis, has recently proposed expanding a controversial measure, the so-called Don't Say Gay law. Now, that restricts talking about gender and sexuality in schools. Stepping back for a second, what do you think is really going on in the United States right now?
Bad stuff, and that's what I think of it. You know, bad politicians who, drunk with power, who want to get out there, and I don't know what they're trying to prove, really. I mean, there's a group of mothers now going around saying that they want to protect their children. Protect them from what? You know, protect them from talking about things, protect them from knowing about things, because even if they don't let them read books, they're still, you know, their bodies are still going to change, and their feelings about their bodies are going to change. And you can't control that. They have to be able to read, to know, to question.
If you want to be in the club, then you have to wear a bra.
And what do you think Margaret and her mother would have to say about all of that?
You don't want to hear the words that I would use about that, but I know that Margaret and her mother would be very much wanting to protect a young person, any person's right to read, right to intellectual freedom, right to choose.
Judy Blume, thank you so much for speaking to us.
Thank you so much.
And I was lucky not just to speak to her, but to see the film already. It's out on May the 19th, and it is gorgeous. Tracy, were you a Judy Blume fan as you were growing up?
Well, yes, and what an icon, and how fantastic to hear what she has to say. But actually, there's something very serious about what she's talking about, and the idea that we're going to clamp down on women's autonomy and understanding and knowledge about growing up and the things that face us. And certainly in America, she has every right to be worried, I would imagine.
Murray, I don't imagine you were reading Judy Blume under the covers, but what did you make of what she had to say?
I'm so thrilled to see Judy Blume getting a voice again to talk about the topics of diversity. And as was referred to in the recording, it's alarming that these things can regress so quickly. And so making sure that these topics about diversity are important, and then we think about all the diversity that we need to bring into the workplace and into government to make sure that we make fairer and better policies.
Lynette, are you going to go see the movie?
I can't wait.
Oh. Yeah. Well, I highly recommend it. I think I am allowed to say that in the studio. It's been great having all three of you here this morning, giving us your insights on a whole wide range of issues. And it's good to close the programme with something to make you feel good, not not just because we're nearly at the Easter break, but we've talked this morning about serious dangers from technology and that very hard question that we started with. How should our politicians manage the risks and opportunities of migration? The Home Secretary told us she wants the numbers to come down, but it was interesting that she did not want to commit to her previous hope, that Conservative target of getting it below 100,000 a year.
The clear answer I can give you is that I support our manifesto commitment to get overall migration numbers down, including legal migration.
But you said
so
in
I do
October.
believe.
Have you changed your mind?
I do believe that we have, the high levels of the high numbers of people coming in through work and study routes is high.
But when it comes to illegal migration, and particularly those cross-channel crossings, she is determined to go on with her plan to send people to Rwanda. But there are practical and political problems for that set of proposals. Don't forget, though, that the Prime Minister has chosen ending those dangerous crossings as a promise that you can judge him on. Jeopardy? You bet. But after all that, it's time for a little lie down. We are off next week for Easter Sunday, but in the meantime, you can catch up on iPlayer, and as ever, there's tons to get into on the BBC website too. Thank you so much for your company. Have a happy Easter, and we'll see you very soon. Goodbye.
The team that reaches there in 5th place will be eliminated from the race.
Oh my God!
I'm nervous, I'm under pressure. We need to get back into the game.
Monique's injured herself.
We can't get stuck here tonight.
Race Across the World continues Wednesday at 9 on BBC One and iPlayer.
Who's finished it? Magpie Murders. It's very Agatha Christie. It's missing the last chapter.
Alan's dead.
I'm going to go to Suffolk and look for the missing pages. Everyone he knew was in it. That's why the last chapter was taken, because it reveals the secret. Somebody killed him. The answer's in the book.
Magpie Murders. Press red for all episodes on BBC iPlayer.
And now on BBC One, the latest news and debate from the world of politics.
Hello and welcome to Politics London. Coming up, in the capital, a crisis in fostering. Hundreds of children need families to look after them.
We may feel like that we're independent and we have that bit of ego, but really and truly deep down we just want love and we want to feel valued and we want to have a voice.
Good to have you with us for the show. Hello, I'm Samantha Simmons. We are joined for the duration of the programme by Rushanara Ali, Labour MP for Bethnal Green and Bow, and by Paul Scully, Conservative MP for Sutton and Cheam, who is also Minister for London. A warm welcome to you both. Great to have you on the show. And as ever, if you'd like to join in the conversation at home, you can tweet us at BBC London News. Now, I want to start with the ULEZ. And Paul, I know you're keen to chat about the proposed extension to the ultra-low emission zone to York constituency. What are constituents saying about it?
I've just been in a surgery this morning and all but one person raised ULEZ as a massive issue. There's apparently 150,000 cars the Mayor reckons are not compliant for the ULEZ. 28,000 of them are in Sutton. So you can imagine why are Sutton residents are concerned, because they find it hard to get around London, not necessarily in and out of London. So if they're going about their work, if they're small self-employed businesses, if they're poorer people that can't afford a replacement car, which the Mayor basically says poor people don't own cars in London, which is absolute rubbish, then they're really going to struggle. We're always talking about the cost of living, And to whack a £12.50 charge is not the best way to actually take people with us along the journey to make sure that we can breathe clean air, that we can get towards net zero. You have to take people along that journey with you.
And what about you? What are your feelings on it?
Well, I'm appalled. I think what I'm trying to do at the moment is three things. We've got there is an area in the GLA Act which allows the government to address this if the Mayor's transport strategy is in conflict with the national transport strategy. And as well as London as being affected, my constituents, there are people in Surrey and Kent that don't get to vote for the Mayor, that don't qualify for the scrappage scheme. So as far as I'm concerned, it looks like it is in conflict, but it is a grey area in law. There's Daniel Moylan, Lord Moylan, who's trying to change the Levelling Up Bill to allow councils to have a greater say in this, rather than just being ridden roughshod by the Mayor. And also there are 5 councils, Hillingdon, Harrow, Bromley and Bexley and Surrey, that are taking the Mayor to judicial review because they don't believe that he consulted on it properly. The fact that he bought the cameras before he made his decision showed it was prejudged.
Cleaning up London's air, isn't it? As Minister for London, don't you support that?
Look, I think that if you look at the Mayor's own study that he commissioned by Jacobs, it shows that it reduces the air pollution by about 1.5% in Sutton. They describe it as negligible themselves. We all want to breathe clean air. This is not the way to do it. Whereas the extension that he did to the North and South Circular had a sense about it, and the previous Mayor Boris Johnson was already moving towards that direction. In outer London, the air quality and the debate is very, very different, and I don't think he needs to be doing it.
Shannara, has he got a point there that some areas where these measures are going to be implemented and will cost